What if saving a life meant you couldn't go home? Rising chef Elise Thibodeaux left New Orleans to escape heartbreak. In Seoul, she witnesses a stranger poisoning a magnate's dinner, and her choice to intervene pulls her into a world where power has a price. Keep watching for part 1 of A Taste of Betrayal and see how one plate changes everything.
The moment she'd been waiting for. Steam curled up from the gas range. The scent of gochujang, butter, and the holy trinity of her childhood onions, bell pepper and celery, filled the air. Elise Thibodeaux's hands moved with careful precision, placing the final garnish of parsley on her signature Creole Korean fusion dish. 6 months ago, she'd reached out to her childhood friend, Kim Jackson, the owner of the restaurant Modu, purchased a one-way ticket to Seoul, and wrapped herself in the anonymity that comes with being a foreigner in a new country. Despite Kim's insistence that she start in the kitchen, Elise asked to start as a waitress to familiarize herself with the menu, patrons, and staff. During that time, she'd been the waitress who knew her way around the kitchen, but whom no one had really trusted. Whispers had nipped at her footsteps because of her strange accent, her cinnamon skin tone and voluminous curls, not to mention her familiar friendliness with Kim Jackson, the owner. She had endured stares, mispronunciations of her name, awkward glances from staff, and the feeling of being an outsider. Still, Elise had persisted, quietly and humbly, proving herself through hard work and perseverance. The long hours taking orders and clearing tables had eventually led to dicing vegetables, plating dishes, and being in the one place where she felt like a queen, the kitchen. In no time at all, she'd ascended to sous chef. Tonight, the atmosphere when she'd walked through the doors had been off. Waitstaff ran around like frantic ants. Sharp Korean crisscrossed the kitchen, landing like torpedoes that sent people scrambling for cover. Before she could don an apron, Kim was waiting for her, worry lines etched on his forehead. Seo Jun, the head chef, was out sick, and Tae Hyun Kang and his business associates would be dining tonight. A shiver ran down her spine. Tae Hyun Kang. Even the name carried weight in Seoul's upper circles. Tonight, he and his associates had reserved the private dining room, and the meal they received would either cement Modu's place at their table or quietly end it. She felt that weight intensely as she wrapped a black apron around her waist. 45 minutes later, Elise stood back and admired the plate of perfection in front of her. Gochujang crawfish etouffee over black garlic dirty rice. Crawfish tails in a tangy red sauce enriched with doenjang and a splash of gochujang to add just the right balance of heat. This was hers. Completely hers. Woo Jin, one of the new waiters, approached, bowing slightly, his eyes never meeting hers, as he picked up the dish and set it on the tray. "I'll take this for Tae Hyun Kang," he said quietly. Elise frowned slightly, wondering that an inexperienced waiter who'd only worked at Modu for a month would be called upon to serve such a high-profile guest. Her thoughts evaporated as quickly as they'd come, anticipating that her signature dish was on its way to be served as a testament to fine dining at Modu. On the spur of the moment, she wiped her hands and decided to follow the waiter at a discreet distance. She wanted to witness Tae Hyun Kang's reaction as he first tasted the sum of her hopes and dreams. She stuck to the shadows of the dimly lit hallway leading to the private dining room, discarding the guilt she felt at temporarily abandoning the kitchen on such a busy night. She froze as a figure stepped into the waiter's path. It was a man she didn't recognize. He wasn't staff or security, but he was definitely intimidating. His face was a smooth and expressionless mask, but his eyes were like shards of ice, reflecting a fierce determination and a hint of danger. He overshadowed Woo Jin by several inches. His dark presence seemed to fill the hallway like an expensively dressed bogeyman. Though she wanted to melt into a dim corner, there seemed to be some unspoken agreement between the nondescript waiter and the stranger. Wordlessly, a vial appeared in the stranger's hand. He then proceeded to drop a clear liquid onto her dish. Elise's heart traveled into her throat, making it go dry with fear. What was this man doing? And why was Woo Jin letting him do it? After a few rushed words, the stranger pressed a folded wad of cash into the waiter's palm, before it quickly disappeared into his pocket. The exchange had taken less than a few seconds, yet it seemed to Elise that she'd watched a nightmare unfold that was only going to get worse when she saw the stranger disappear into the private dining room. A few steps outside the dining room, Woo Jin seemed to count down silently, as though timing his entrance into the dining room on the heels of the stranger. Elise's heart was a caged bird battering itself against her sternum as she dry-washed her hands and wondered what to do. Something was definitely wrong, and whatever decision she made could result in disaster. It occurred to her that if she didn't do something fast, her reputation as a chef might be over before it starts, or worse, lead her to the back of a police car. Steeling her resolve, Elise pressed her face to the narrow glass panel of the private dining room door and immediately spotted Tae-hyun Kang, seated at the head of the table. Her breath caught. Even from this distance, Tae-hyun Kang commanded the room, his profile sharp as cut granite against the ambient light. Even from this distance, Tae-hyun Kang sat motionless at the table's head, his face carved with the hard angles of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His tailored black suit covered a muscular frame of barely contained power, like a coiled adder, confident in its restraint. Dangerous not because it moved, but because if it did, its strike would be devastating. Elise's stomach twisted in knots as, to her horror, her dish was being placed directly in front of him. This was it. The culmination of 6 months of work now threatened in seconds. Instinct took over. She barged through the door. All eyes turned toward her. She swallowed the lump in her throat, and the fear that left all her nerve endings tingling. "Don't eat that!" she snapped, her voice trembling but firm. The room went silent. The air was thick, every motion frozen. Elise inched closer to Tae-hyun Kang, prepared to push her tainted dish off the table if necessary. He tilted his head towards her, cold, measured, like a predator assessing prey. His dark eyes bored into hers intently. "How do you know?" he asked, calm and deadly. She tried to ignore the daggers she was sure she felt coming from the stranger, who was seated not even 3 seats away at the table. She avoided the gaze of Woo Jin, who stood frozen inches away from her, looking as if he wanted to dissolve into vapor. "I saw someone pour something from a vial over the dish I prepared for you," she explained. "Out in the hallway. Just seconds ago." Her gaze betrayed her, her eyes flickering involuntarily towards the stranger. Though the stranger's expression remained an impassive mask, his jaw tightened minutely, and a single bead of sweat, glinting under the recessed lights, slid down his temple. Elise felt a sick sense of satisfaction at the sign of stress, but it did nothing to loosen the iron clamp around her lungs. The other men at the table, all well-groomed, sharp-eyed, and silent as chess pieces, seemed to take their cue from the stranger's sudden discomfort. One man shifted his whiskey glass, another adjusted his tie, but all of them watched Tae-hyun Kang with an intensity bordering on worship or fear. The air in the room thickened, every molecule pregnant with anticipation, as if the world itself hovered on the edge of a knife. Elise's own senses sharpened to painful clarity. She could smell the metallic tang of nervous sweat, the acrid bite of anxiety that clung to the room's elegant surfaces. The silence stretched, taut as piano wire, and for a moment she almost believed she could see the future unfolding. Her arrest, Headlines splashed with her name, the shame of failure and scandal following her back across the ocean. Instead, time slowed to a crawl. Tai Hyun Kang's eyes slid from Elise to the man and then to Woo Jin, who stood at stiff attention, mouth drawn in a thin line. For a heartbeat, not a single soul at the table dared to breathe. Then, with glacial calm, Tae Hyun Kang picked up his fork and knife, the soft scrape of metal on ceramic sounding obscenely loud. He regarded the dish as if it were a live grenade, then, with a surgeon's precision, sliced off a small piece of crawfish and held it up to the light. He did not eat, not yet. He simply watched Elise, eyes as dark and fathomless as deep water. She realized then that she had become the axis around which the room spun. Every eye was on her. She could feel the tick of her own pulse booming in her ears. The urge to flee was primal, but she forced herself to remain anchored, to meet Tae Hyun Kang's gaze without flinching. She understood, on some instinctual level, that any sign of retreat would be tantamount to an admission of guilt. The stranger was the first to break. Just the faintest twitch of his lip, the tiniest shift in his seat. Enough for anyone fluent in the language of violence to recognize as a prelude to action. Tai Hyun Kang, without ever taking his gaze off Elise, set down his fork and gestured minutely to a man at his right. The subordinate rose, padded to the stranger's side, and whispered something low and urgent. A bead of sweat trickled further down the stranger's cheek, pooling at his jawline, but his hand stayed perfectly still above the linen tablecloth. "Come here, Dae-sung," Tae Hyun Kang ordered, his voice cold. Dae-sung. Elise quickly noted the ease with which Tae Hyun Kang said the stranger's name. There was shared history and familiarity in the tone. Though he'd been a stranger to Elise out in the hallway, where she'd watched him poison her dish, the man's name would be etched into her memory after tonight. Hearing his name called caused the man to flinch in his seat. He protested in a torrent of tense Korean, but a shadow moved. A security guard materialized from the corner, pressing a gun into Dae-sung's back. He rose, frozen in terror, and walked the length of the table toward Tae Hyun. "Did you tamper with my meal?" Tae Hyun asked in clipped English. "No," Dae-sung replied immediately, too quickly. But the sweat betrayed him. Woo Jin, still frozen, watched, fear quickly turning to horror, as Tae Hyun spoke in rapid Korean that crackled like a whip, signaling security to check his pockets. A wad of cash emerged from the waiter's pocket, causing him to crumple, eyes wide, stammering apologies. Tae Hyun lifted the fork again, his gaze flashing dangerously between Woo Jin and Dae-sung. "Which one of you will sample this first?" Dae-sung's face, which moments ago had been almost sheepish, sharpened into something much more sinister. With a growl, he spoke one word, and like a bubble popping, the air in the private dining room became fluid again, releasing everyone at once. Chaos erupted. Chairs scraped. Security shifted. Dae-sung lunged. His eyes darkened with hatred in Elise's direction. "You bitch." He immediately put himself between her and the crazed Dae-sung, whose eyes flashed with unrestrained violence in her direction. He signaled to his security detail, "Restrain them. Alive." His men moved quickly to obey. They restrained both Dae-sung and Woo Jin. Elise's mouth was agape, shocked at how her life had just pivoted violently. She'd just witnessed something no one else dared to stop, and she saved the life of a man whose power was absolute. She'd fallen in the crosshairs of something more dangerous and deadly than she could have imagined. She didn't have long to dwell on this sudden shift in her fortune as Tae Hyun rushed her out of the private dining room. His security swiftly cleared their exit. The whole restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the commotion spilled from the private room into the corridor. Elise could feel every gaze, real or imagined, prickling the back of her neck as Tai Hyun Kang hustled her forward with a grip that was both protective and unyielding. The owner, Kim, stood rooted near the kitchen's swinging doors, like a sentinel, the silent plea of his eyes sending Elise a stark warning to keep moving, not to break stride, not to give the chaos behind them a chance to swallow her whole. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. His jaw tensed, and he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if to communicate that in this moment nothing could be done for her except to let her go. The rest of the staff didn't dare look directly, but their peripheral tension was a palpable fog, thick enough to choke on. Tae Hyun Kang maneuvered her through the labyrinth of prep tables and refrigeration units, their shadows monstrous in the corridor's harsh light. He never once loosened his grip, his other hand held slightly behind him in a subtle but unmistakable gesture of warning to anyone thinking of interference. As they pushed through the emergency exit, the door's heavy clang echoed down the alleyway, sealing off the warm, familiar chaos of the kitchen behind her, and plunging Elise into the cold, metallic world outside. The air in the alley was sharp with winter, biting at her exposed cheeks, and it took a second for her eyes to adjust to the harsh, sodium yellow of the lone security lamp that flickered overhead. The alley itself was deserted, save for the looming black silhouette of a Mercedes Maybach S-Class, its glossy paint purring with the reflected light. Like the hide of some predatory animal, every step toward it felt like crossing a minefield, but Tae Hyun Kang moved with absolute confidence, propelling her forward as if he were a force of nature and she, a reluctant element in his wake. She barely noticed the chill on her arms over the volcanic panic rising in her chest. The car's doors were already unlocked, the rear passenger door yawning open to reveal a plush, shadowy interior. The driver, a mountain of a man with a slate-gray buzz cut and the kind of face that never moved except for a twitch of the jaw, stood sentinel by the car. His stare was as blank and unreadable as a statue, but Elise could sense the potential for violence coiled just beneath the surface, as if he could break her in half with a single flex of his fingers. Tae Hyun's security detail flanked them at a discreet distance. Every one of them radiated the same menacing calm as their boss, their dark suits pristine, their eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses. Elise barely had time to process before she was, with unexpected gentleness, guided into the back seat. The leather was cold, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and something metallic, and she sank down, feeling the car swallow her whole. Tae Hyun Kang remained outside for a moment, issuing rapid-fire commands to his lieutenant, words so clipped and precise they might have been a code. The lieutenant nodded gravely, then peeled off, barking orders into a cell phone as he vanished around the corner of the alley. He slid in beside her, his presence somehow expanding to fill the entire back seat. The door shut with a hydraulic finality, the outside world reduced to a muted hum. Elise's heart thundered in her ears as Tae Hyun fired off several crisp orders to the driver in rapid Korean. The engine rumbled to life, and they peeled away from the curb in a silent, predatory glide. "I only live a few blocks from here," Elise said into the silence that now engulfed the back of the car. For a second, she was certain she saw the ghost of a smirk play across the sharp angles and planes of the businessman's face. But it disappeared so quickly, she wasn't sure. "Tell me your name." "It's Elise," she answered warily. "Elise Thibodeaux." His raptor gaze made her shift uneasily. She felt like prey, but shrugged the feeling off by crossing her arms defiantly. Like a Mindredder, Tae Hyun answered the protest on the tip of her tongue. "Well, Elise," he said her name as if he were savoring the sound of it on his tongue, "you aren't going home." "Then Where am I going? She spluttered. If I tell you, you become a liability. His jaw tightened. For now you are coming with me. You saved my life. I don't let debts go unpaid. First impressions. The Maybach moved like a shadow through the Seoul night, its engine a muted hum beneath the insulated quiet of the back seat. Outside, the city streamed past in streaks of neon and blurred headlights. Rain-slick streets reflecting the glow like spilled paint. Inside, it was almost unnervingly still. Taehyun pretended to be engrossed in the near-constant stream of text messages flowing across the screen of his phone, but the truth was that he was using his phone as a pretext to discreetly observe the beautiful enigma sitting beside him. Elise sat, pressed lightly against the leather, turned toward the darkened window as though the city might offer answers he couldn't. Long, voluminous curls cascaded over her shoulders, dark honey and amber catching the car's ambient light in subtle glints. Her skin reminded him of cinnamon, smooth, warm-toned, rich, and her profile was all quiet strength and elegant lines. Her eyes, almond-shaped, slightly upturned like deliberate brushstrokes, were fixed on something outside he couldn't see. There was a furrow between her brows, but no tears, no shaking, no visible sign that her life had just been hanging by a thread. She'd been at the eye of a hurricane that had quickly turned into chaos as accusations and fury swirled. But she was calm now, subdued. Her full lips were pressed together in thought. He found he wanted to know what those eyes looked like up close, whether they sharpened when she was angry, whether they softened when she laughed. Ridiculous, he told himself. This was not the time. He realized he should thank her, but the words sat heavy on his tongue, foreign and dusty from lack of use. "Are you hurt?" he asked instead, the question sounding more abrupt in the quiet car than he intended. She blinked, pulling herself from whatever thought had held her hostage outside the window. She turned her head slightly, and for the first time, he saw her eyes fully, deep, layered shades of chocolate and umber, ringed with exhaustion but still alert. "No," she said after a moment, voice husky but steady. "Just processing." He inclined his head once. "You did well." She let out a short breath that might almost have been a laugh if it weren't so brittle. "I ruined your dinner service." He nearly smiled. Nearly. "You ruined a fool's plan. I'll survive." Silence slipped between them again, broken only by the faint hiss of tires on wet asphalt. He turned his gaze toward the front for a moment, watching the back of his driver's head. The familiar sense of control, of order, of things happening exactly as he dictated, felt thin tonight. The phone in his hand buzzed. Another message from Park, another update from his men at the restaurant, another confirmation of what he'd already understood. The second Elise had barged into the private dining room, and his cousin's eyes had flashed with thwarted rage. Dae-sung. The name tasted sour even when she said it. The man who tried to poison you, who is he? Taehyun's jaw tightened. "My cousin." His mind replayed the scene, not from the restaurant's security camera footage now streaming into his inbox, but from memory. Dae-sung had avoided his eyes as he sat back down at the table after his brief disappearance. But that had been his usual dynamic as of late evidence of a guilty conscience. Taehyun had expected the moment of betrayal to come, had anticipated it just not as publicly and as crudely as it happened, like he was some cheap rival from the streets, instead of his blood. He'd once been the boy who'd shielded his cousin from bullies and harsh words, shielded him from his father's scorn. tried to help him in grieving the loss of his own parents, had been like a brother to him. Yet, for everything he'd done, it had all come down to a waiter who'd been trained for subterfuge, but not trained well enough to hide the faint tremor in his hand as he'd set a poisoned dish down in front of him. And a stranger, a woman, barging into the dining room on instinct, not calculation, eyes wide but determined, caring more about his life than his own blood. Dae-sung's expression had frozen for a millisecond, just long enough for Tae-hyun to know. His grip on the phone tightened until the casing creaked. "I'm sorry." Her shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly. "I know what it feels like to be betrayed by someone close to you." The words were flat, factual, but heavy. "Thank you," he said, forcing the foreign shape of the words past his pride. Her lips parted in faint surprise, then pressed together again. "You're welcome." He turned back to the window before he could let the moment deepen. The Maybach took an exit toward his building, the familiar route threading through a quieter district, where high-rises rose with sleek, guarded elegance. His phone buzzed again. Park. Confirmed. Dae-sung, along with some of those loyal to him, left, working on his route. Council is already asking questions. Of course they were. The empire his father had built did not tolerate visible cracks, and his cousin had just taken a hammer to the foundation. Taehyun's thumb hovered over the screen. He typed, "Find him. Don't engage." Then deleted the last two words. He replaced them. "Wait for my word." He put the phone face down on the seat. Beside him, Elise shifted her focus back to the blurred cityscape, but he could see the fine tremor in her hands now, the delayed response of a body that had been in survival mode too long. She wasn't as calm as she looked. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. She breathed out through her nose, a slow, uneven exhale. "I'd be an idiot if I wasn't." "That's not what I asked." She swallowed, eyes tracking the reflections on the glass. When she answered, her honesty surprised him. "I'm terrified," she said. A corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. "Good," he murmured. "Fear keeps you alive. But don't give men like Dae-seeing the satisfaction of seeing it." She glanced at him, studying him differently now, not as a wealthy customer or mysterious benefactor, but as a man standing at the edge of a fracture he could not yet name. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Are you afraid?" He considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes," he said, "but not of him." "Then of what?" He looked down at the phone, at the unseen network of loyalties and betrayals waiting beyond this quiet car. "Of how far I'll go to stop him," he answered. The car slowed as they approached the entrance to his building. Glass, steel, and guarded security. He straightened his cuffs, reassembling the mask he wore for the world. Penthouse sanctuary or prison. "We're here," Tae-hyun announced. Elise looked up, mouth agape, as she took in the sleek, modern building that rose like a blade of glass and steel against Seoul's glittering skyline. From the street, it looked like any other ultra-luxury residential tower, catering to executives and foreign elites. Understated signage, a minimalist facade, all sharp lines and mirrored surfaces that vanished into the night sky. Tae-hyun Kang offered his hand as she exited the Maybach. His touch sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. She wondered all over again about this mysterious man and what she had gotten herself tangled in. Security began before the lobby doors. She noticed that cameras were subtly embedded in planters, with infrared sensors tucked behind ornamental lighting. The marble lobby glowed in soft amber light, perfumed faintly with cedar and citrus, a deliberate distraction from the faint hum of surveillance systems, quietly monitoring every motion. When they reached the elevators, Elise stiffened at the biometric access requirement. The penthouse might be a temporary sanctuary or a prison. She hesitated as the elevator doors slid open, but was decisively ushered into the elevator by Taehyun Kang's firm hand at the small of her back. Two of his security personnel materialized in the hallway as they reached the penthouse floor. They swept into the apartment to do a cursory security check. Taehyun led her in on their heels, his hand once again at the small of her back, guiding her in. She tried not to stare in awe, but scanned the opulent apartment in silence. The penthouse spanned nearly the entire floor, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the Han River like a silent watchtower. The design was coldly elegant. Black marble floors, low lighting, and minimalist European imported furniture. She stood in the middle of the living room, unwilling to touch anything or sit anywhere, lest she disturb the almost religious sense of order in the space. Not a photograph was out of place. Not a speck of dust was visible. It was a luxury stripped of warmth, a reflection of its owner's world, power dressed as sophistication, and safety built on silence and control. She was hyper-aware of the businessman who hadn't left her side as she scanned the room. She felt the intensity of his nearness as the two men from his security outfit exited the apartment soundlessly, leaving her alone with him. She turned to face him, daring to look into eyes that were black, inky pools, whose depths she feared she could drown in, the longer she gazed into them. "You can take the guest room's second door on the left. Lock it, if you want. There should be a clean t-shirt in the drawer to sleep in." "Where will you be?" Elise hated how vulnerable the admission made her feel. Hated that she was already so dependent on a virtual stranger. She absently bit her lip, the worry pooling in her eyes and escaping onto her cheeks. She was shocked at the gentleness in his touch, as he tenderly brushed away the moisture. "I'll be in the room down the hall. You should rest. You have nothing to fear while you're here." His words cast a spell over her, leaving her knees weak with fatigue. She trudged over to the guest bedroom door, her steps heavy, carrying the weight of a night that had taken so many sharp twists and turns. When she closed the door, she leaned against it for a moment, as the last dregs of adrenaline holding her together evaporated. She barely registered the lush interior of the bedroom as she zeroed in on the bathroom and the promise of a hot shower. She slid beneath the buttery soft sheets of the king-sized bed and was pulled away into slumber like a soft caress. The specters she'd faced, and the questions that tumbled over each other, temporarily held at bay by exhaustion. The morning after, reality came rushing in with the morning light filtering through the tinted bedroom windows. Elise was surprised by how peacefully she'd slept, despite the sense of danger that lingered like a bad aftertaste. Sliding away from the buttery soft sheets she was tempted to melt back into, she left the bedroom, determined to obtain answers she desperately needed. A stillness lay over the apartment, but she followed the savory smells teasing her nose. A tiny old Korean lady was busy in the kitchen preparing a traditional Korean spread of steamed rice, a light seaweed soup, and John, alongside croissants, fruit bacon, and eggs. Elise's stomach rumbled at the sight of such a feast. The older Korean lady looked up from her ministrations and smiled warmly. Elise noticed that the tiny older woman had kind eyes. "Elise?" she asked with a thick accent. "Yes, Hermione," Elise said shyly, smoothing down the t-shirt that barely reached the middle of her thigh. "You can call me Sujin. Have a seat and eat. Taehyun asked me to bring some comfortable clothes for you." She nodded to the bag sitting on the couch. Thank you for the clothes and breakfast. You're welcome, dear. Where is Tae-hyun? Elise asked coyly, looking over the rim of her coffee cup. The boss. He comes and goes. You know how important men are always somewhere to be. What does he do anyway? Soojin paused from wiping the counter off. Her wise old eyes held a mix of sympathy and understanding that comes with years of service. He runs operations. Nothing you need to worry yourself over. She nodded absently, sure that Soojin knew more about Taehyun's dealings than loyalty would allow her to reveal. She chewed her meal slowly, her mind anything but calm. Every tick reminded her that safety was only borrowed. By mid-morning, Soojin was done with housekeeping, and Elise found herself alone, once again. The pressure of unanswered questions built up inside her like a match hovering just above dry tinder. As the minutes stretched into hours, the penthouse seemed more like a gilded cage rather than a sanctuary. The hallway beyond the penthouse door was also quiet, too quiet. When she eased the door open just a sliver, the faint mechanical hum of the building's air system rushed in, mingling with the scent of polished steel and expensive cologne. 2 men stood guard in front of the elevator, immovable silhouettes dressed head to toe in black, tailored suits that hugged their solid frames. Their posture was identical, hands clasped in front, shoulders squared, earpieces coiled like faint silver threads against their necks. The overhead lighting glinted off the matte gleam of their shoes, catching on the faint bulge beneath their jackets that could only be a weapon. They didn't speak, didn't move, yet both turned their heads in unison, their eyes locking on her the moment her shadow crossed the threshold. Their faces were unreadable, all discipline and zero emotion, the kind of stillness that comes from being paid well to notice everything. Elise froze, her fingertips gripping the edge of the door. For half a heartbeat, she considered it. A sprint to the elevator, the desperate press of the button. Maybe a miracle. But something in their stance told her she wouldn't make it 2 steps. The taller one tilted his chin just slightly, a silent acknowledgement that he'd seen her. That was enough. Heart thudding, Elise ducked back inside, easing the door shut until the click echoed softly through the apartment. A reminder that whatever kind of place this was, it wasn't one she could simply walk out of. Outside, Seoul transformed slowly, almost imperceptibly, from the bright pulse of day into the glittering expanse of night. The skyline flickered to life 1 tower at a time. Neon advertisements reflected like liquid color against the glass. Headlights weaved along the streets below in disciplined streams, the hum of the city muted beneath the penthouse's insulated calm. Elise pressed her forehead lightly to the cool window pane, watching it all unfold. The distance between her and the city felt enormous, like she was orbiting Seoul rather than inhabiting it. Behind her, the faint drone of the television still muttered from the couch, endless K-drama dialogue blending into meaningless noise. 3, maybe 4 hours were lost. She discovered a bottle of Opus 1 and poured herself a glass. She traced the rim of the glass absently with her fingertip, her reflection faint in the dark surface, hair tousled, eyes dulled by monotony and something that felt dangerously close to longing. Out there, people were living messy, noisy lives filled with motion and meaning. In here, time stood still, and still there was no sign of Tae-hyun Kang. Desperation brought determination. It occurred to her that she could simply disappear, just as she had when she decided to leave Louisiana and all the heartache and disappointment behind. The key was confidence. With a deep breath, she tilted her chin up slightly, pushed her shoulders back, and feigned confidence. She didn't feel as she opened the penthouse door once again and began to walk leisurely toward the elevator. She kept her eyes focused on her destination, as if the two guards still standing at the elevator doors were merely statues put in place for no other reason than decoration. Their eyes followed her like lasers, their lips painted with matching smirks, as though they had a hive mind and shared the same thought. Leisurely, she sashayed over to the closed elevator doors, ignoring the two men. With a deep breath, she attempted to press the elevator button. "You aren't authorized to leave. Boss's orders," one of them said impassively. "Who's going to stop me?" she said to the guard on her left. Her challenge erased the smirk off his face, but she cringed inwardly at how quickly his face hardened into concrete. The guard's low voice crackled through the earpiece, too quiet for her to make out the words. Her stomach knotted, but she kept her chin high, refusing to let them see even a flicker of fear. The second guard shifted his weight, barely, but enough to let her know he was prepared to block her path the moment she even thought about stepping forward. The elevator button under her finger stayed dark, as if mocking her attempt. The hallway stretched, silent, tense. The fluorescent lights hummed above like a warning. Elise swallowed and forced herself not to back away, not to shrink. She'd made it this far, and she refused to fold now. Then, from the earpiece, a faint response came through. A clipped, familiar voice. Tae-hyun's voice. The guard straightened. He looked at Elise, expression neutral again. "Miss, you need to return inside. Now." It wasn't a threat. It was an order delivered with the calm finality of someone who knew exactly how this would end if she refused. For a long moment, she stood there, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at her to run. Anywhere, just run. But the guard's stance didn't waver, and the elevator remained stubbornly shut. Slowly, she lowered her hand from the button. The guard's eyes remained fixed on her as she turned away, her retreat feeling heavier than her steps. Defeated, she slipped back into the penthouse, the door closing behind her with a soft click that felt painfully loud in the quiet corridor. Inside, the air felt thicker, the silence heavier, as if the apartment itself was reminding her that escape, at least for now, wasn't an option. Her misguided escape attempt seemed to have triggered some unspoken alarm, because 15 minutes later, the elusive Tae-hyun Kang strolled into the penthouse. He shut the door behind him with a quiet thud, the sound settling over the room like a lid on a boiling pot. For a moment, he just stood there, shoulders tense beneath his blood-stained collar, breath controlled but edged, as if he hadn't fully returned from wherever he came from. Turning the TV off, Elise slid off the couch, her face stony. She planted herself solidly in front of him and crossed her arms as she tilted her chin up stubbornly to meet his dark gaze. "Where have you been?" she demanded. He met her sharp question with stillness first, the kind that said he was weighing how much to give her. Then his expression shifted, smoothing into something unreadable, almost impersonal. "Where I go, what I do, who I deal with." His jaw tightened. "Is no concern of yours." He stepped out of his shoes and shrugged off his jacket with controlled movements, as if deliberately refusing to rise to her tone. The red stain on his collar stood out starkly, but he didn't acknowledge it. She gasped and, without thinking, went to touch the stain on his collar. "Are you hurt?" He caught her hand before her touch reached his neck and held it, forcing her eyes to meet his. She bit her bottom lip self-consciously, pulling her hand back, but not before she felt the jolt of electricity pulse through her fingers from his touch. It was then that she noticed the weariness in his eyes. He seemed weary from the constant danger, weary from the night he had just come from, and weary of having to shield someone who wasn't used to this world. "You're here because I'm keeping you safe," he said, glancing down at her as though reminding himself rather than warning her. "The safest thing for you is knowing as little as possible." He turned slightly, distancing himself, signaling the conversation was nearing a line he wouldn't cross. He stepped around her, loosening his tie. But Elise refused to be dismissed after spending an entire day on pins and needles. She followed on his heels. She could tell Tae-hyun was used to giving orders and being obeyed without question, but she wasn't one of his employees. "I'm sorry," she blurted, voice taut with raw nerves. "But that's not good enough, Tae-hyun." He said nothing, but the muscles at the corners of his jaw rippled as if he was bracing himself for impact. She pressed on, refusing to let her uncertainty turn to pleading. "You think you can lock me up in here and I'll just accept it? Pretend my life didn't just blow up overnight because of you?" She shook her head, each movement sharp, deliberate. "I'm in danger. I know that much. And I know it's because I saved you. And now I'm the one hiding behind locked doors and bulletproof glass while you walk around like you own the world." His eyes didn't flinch, but his hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. The blood stain on his collar had dried to a rusty brown, a silent threat that she didn't want to think about, but couldn't ignore. "I can't work," she continued, her voice thinning as the words sped up. "I can't go back to my apartment. Hell, I can't even call anyone because it's a risk. Everything I built for myself, every bit of normalcy I had left, has been ripped out from under me. And the only explanation I get is that you're keeping me safe." When her voice finally cracked, the room went very, very quiet. Taehyun's reply came low, steady, each syllable placed with care, like setting down a loaded weapon. "You're right." The admission jolted her. She blinked, thrown off balance. "You're right," he repeated softer. "You didn't choose any of this. You shouldn't have to pay for saving my life." He took a single step closer, slow, hands open at his sides. Not a threat, but an anchor. "So, I'm going to make this simple," he said, "and very clear." His gaze held hers, unblinking, immovable. "You're staying here this week. Non-negotiable, not because I enjoy locking you in a cage, because I cannot protect you anywhere else yet." A beat. "And protecting you is the only thing I care about right now." She opened her mouth, ready to argue. He lifted a hand, one finger, asking for a breath, not demanding it. "But I'm not asking you to do it blind," he added. "You want answers? You'll get enough to breathe." He nodded toward the kitchen. "Sit. Eat something. You're running on wine and adrenaline. I'll give you what I can while you do." He moved past her, not touching, just the quiet gravity of him brushing her shoulder as he went to the kitchen. He flicked on a low light, opened a cabinet, and pulled down a bowl. He worked with the same calm he used to move men and money. Water on the boil, miso and silk tofu, a handful of scallions, the small, certain motions of someone who had learned to create order in crisis. Elise stood by the bar, arms folded tight, watching him like a wary animal deciding whether to bolt. He didn't look back when he started talking. The distance made honesty easier. "My cousin has wanted my seat for a long time," he said, voice even. "Lately, he's been losing ground. Desperate men do stupid things. He thought poisoning me would be clean, public, but deniable. He bribed a new hire. He misjudged you." Steam curled from the pot. He ladled the soup with deliberate care and set the bowl on the bar counter. The savory smell made Elise's stomach growl, and on impulse, she finally took a seat on the stool and pulled the steaming bowl towards her. I have eyes on his money, on his movements, on his men, Taehyun continued. But last night proved there's a gap, someone he got to that I didn't see in time. Until I close that gap, you do not leave this apartment. He finally looked at her. That is not a punishment, it is math. He rested his forearms lightly on the counter opposite her, close but not crowding. Up close, the dried stain at his collar told a longer story. The weary cut of his eyes told the rest. He noticed her gaze on his collar again. You asked where I was, he said quietly. I was handling fallout, making sure the man who touched your life can't get close to it again. By doing what? She pressed, softer now. He held her gaze. By cutting off his money, his routes, his people. Not a boast, not a threat, a ledger. You're not going to tell me everything, she said. No, but I will tell you what concerns you. Silence settled as they ate, the kind that lets the air back into the room. She let the warmth of the soup slip down her throat and tried to focus on the taste, the ritual, rather than the fact that she was eating across from a man who had just methodically outlined an ongoing war for his own survival. The tension in the room didn't vanish, exactly, but it softened, settling heavy and inert between them instead of spitting sparks. Taehyun ate with the same deliberation he applied to everything else, never looking up from his bowl until he had finished the last of it. There were no more interrogations, no more sharp accusations or half-truths twisting in the air. Just the two of them, chewing quietly, the clock ticking above the range, as if it too were listening in on the ceasefire. When she finally set her bowl aside, Taehyun looked up, and for a fleeting second, she saw the person behind the warlord, someone who hadn't slept, who'd carried her fate on his back like a stone, who was trying in his own strange way to keep her from breaking under the weight. Elise studied the single bead of broth at the corner of his mouth and said nothing, letting the quiet linger. It was the first moment that felt almost safe since she'd woken up in this gilded cage. Taehyun finished his bowl of soup and straightened, not looming, but the shift in his posture slid the room back under his control. The boss, again. Only now the command felt like a shape built to hold both of them, not to pin her down. Here are the rules, he said, tone even. 1, you don't open the door unless you see the person through the camera and say their name out loud. 2, you keep the phone I give you on you. 3, if you need something, you say it. You don't wait until you're angry enough to set the building on fire. Her mouth curved despite herself. You think I'd set your building on fire? I think you'd try, he said, and the corner of his mouth answered hers. The space between them warmed. Then he added, softer. 4, you don't apologize for being afraid. You survived something you shouldn't have had to. Fear is a bodyguard. We'll make sure it works for you, not against you. Her throat closed unexpectedly. She looked down quickly, blinking hard, then set the spoon aside with care. Why do you care? She asked, barely above a whisper. Really? Because you walked into a war you didn't start, and you didn't run, he said. Because you saved my life when I was too arrogant to see the knife on the table. Because now my cousin believes you matter, and that makes you a target. A breath. And because you do matter. To me. The last line landed between them like a live wire. Her gaze flicked to his, startled. He didn't look away. She studied him, really studied him. The control, the weariness, the bone-deep resolve that felt like steel hammered thin, and under it something she hadn't let herself name yet. Thank you, Taehyun, for keeping it real with me. He dipped his head in acknowledgement. Wordlessly, she slid from the stool and vanished into the guest room. Tae-hyun stood very still in the kitchen, the quiet settling over him like something earned. Then he picked up his phone, the boss again, and began issuing orders in a low, controlled voice, doubling the watch on the building, moving a car he trusted to the garage, locking down 3 names that shouldn't have been anywhere near a dining room. He finished, set the phone face down, and turned off the bright kitchen light, leaving only the low glow. On his way past the hall, he paused, listening, then continued to his room. Between locks and plans and the quiet beat of the city against glass, the apartment felt different. Not just a fortress, something closer to safe.
If you've made it this far, you're my people. Let's make it official by you liking and subscribing to this channel. We'll meet again in part 2.